This is Brandon Hoig of UCFsports.com, and I'm honored to be joined today by Melissa Triebwasser of Frogs Insider Podcast, part of the Dave Campbell Texas Football Network. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. What people don't know is we've already spent 30 minutes chatting because I had you on my show, and now I get to return the favor and chat about TCU with you, which is awesome.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk a little UCF TCU football. It's the Big 12 opener. For both schools. UCF's going on the road to Fort Worth, Texas. It's the first ever matchup between the Knights and Horned Frogs. And yeah, it'll be fun because it seems like, I know we just had this similar conversation on your pod, but these two programs, this is the first matchup. UCF went through their inaugural Big 12 season a year ago. Did not play the TCU during the conference season, and even some sports like basketball didn't seem to. It wasn't until the final regular season, men's basketball game that the two schools met. So I haven't seen a whole lot of interaction between the two fan bases really until now. But I know everyone's really looking forward to this game on Saturday.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. There's a lot of crossovers between these two programs. There's a lot of familiarity at some critical spots. It's going to be fascinating to see how this one kind of plays out, but I definitely think it has the potential to be a new, very fun rivalry in the conference going forward.
Yeah, so just kind of tell us a little bit about your background with TCU. I know for me, just kind of, looking at the program from afar, I've always had a lot of respect for the program and what Gary Patterson built through the years and pretty much earned their way into the BCS and Power 5, earning the bid to the Big 12. And I think maybe there were some growing pains initially, but eventually, became one of the Big 12's better programs and made it to the national championship game a couple years ago. So for you, just how long have you been connected with TCU?
Well, I'm an alum, and I shudder to think and share what year I graduated. But I will say I predate Gary Patterson at TCU. My freshman year, we were 1-10. Our only win was against SMU. That was the final year of the previous regime that led to Dennis Franchione getting hired. Dennis Franchione brought in a defensive coordinator that no one had ever heard of called Gary Patterson. When Coach Fran took off for Alabama after a couple of successful seasons at TCU, Gary Patterson took over. He was a part of the Sun Bowl victory, which was kind of those of us that have been around the program for a while look back as the one that started everything, and then led them from the WAC to Conference USA to the Mountain West Conference, where they became one of the elite programs in the country annually and got to play in a lot of great bowl games, including the Rose Bowl, which is one of those just really magical memories for TCU fans, that perfect season with Andy Dalton at the helm. And that basically earned them an invite to the Big 12. And I don't think there's a TCU fan, myself included, that didn't tear up when they got that invite, knew that TCU had a seat at the table for the foreseeable future. What we didn't know is how different the foreseeable future was about to become. So I have been a TCU fan since I showed up on campus, back in the 90s. It's a program that's been super important to me as an alum, and then I've been covering the team for almost 15 years and almost 10 years alongside my podcast co-host, Jamie Plunkett. And so it's been fun. The ups and downs of this program are fairly legendary if you look at it in the grand scheme of things. But I'm excited to kind of see what TCU is in year 3 of the Sonny Dykes era after the highs of 2022 and the lows of 2023 to see what kind of program he's actually building in Fort Worth and what this team is capable of the next couple of years as we get ready for an inevitable next round of realignment.
Yeah, and I think there's some parallels here between UCF and TCU and just kind of how the two programs were able to kind of, carve out a niche and kind of, rise up through the different levels, so to speak. I mean, UCF was literally through different levels. They started out as a Division III program in the late 70s, eventually went to 1AA, went 1A in 96 and played as an independent, played in the Mid-American Conference, which I'm not sure how many people outside of UCF even know about. They played in the MAC from 2002 to 2004, Conference USA, the American, and so you've been part of this journey. I mean, you're not someone that came along in the last 10 years, obviously. So how fun has this been for you? And kind of what are some of your, maybe a couple favorite memories? Because, I mean, you were there probably in the stadium when there wasn't a whole lot of other fans and the program was struggling. So you've seen it all. So this really means something to you.
I always tell people, I was in the stands when LaDainian Tomlinson set the then single game rushing record in college football with 406 yards against UTEP. I was there at that game. Probably wasn't paying attention, but I was there. We knew they just kept handing it off to number 5, and he just kept getting long runs. So the Rose Bowl win was one of those moments where I just knew that things were going to be different for this program. I bawled my eyes out despite the fact I was there as credentialed media at the end of the Fiesta Bowl. I was so like emotional that the mascot, the little Fiesta Bowl Sun mascot, came up to me and like put his arm around me, and he was like, "Are you okay? Are those happy tears?" And because I'm a smart aleck, my first response is, "You're a mascot. You're not supposed to be talking." But I mean, those kind of moments, and UCF has experienced.
Yeah, I mean, UCF had the Fiesta Bowl win against Baylor at the end of 2013, had the Peach Bowl win against Auburn after 2017. So there's kind of some parallels between the two schools.
And it's like, I always want to be professional in my role I like to call myself a lowercase j journalist. I'm not a professional. This is a part-time thing for me, but I always want to have a level of professionalism and try to keep my bias in check. But at the end of the day, it's still where I went to school. And it's, I live in Fort Worth again now. I've spent more time on that campus than just about anywhere, probably more hours at TCU than I have at my job. But it is something that it means so much to see the program that you love have success and to get to have like been on the sidelines for so much of it, and not just in football, but basketball, watching them make the NCAA tournament. Baseball, I've been to multiple College World Series. Like, it's just always a little bit more emotional because, that's where my degree on my wall hangs is from. And I just think it's really special to get to have seen TCU dig itself out of the depths and out of the path to nowhere, much like UCF, and end up somewhere where they do have a national brand and national respect and can expect to be invited to the playoffs if they do what they need to do. And just in 2014, that wasn't a guarantee. So it's pretty cool to have been a part of it and to watch the journey because of how long and treacherous it was.
Yeah. What do you think makes TCU special? Because when you look at it on the surface, it's a smaller school, right? It's a private school. Don't have, monster enrollments like some of the big state universities do. But it seems like it's Fort Worth's, does the city of Fort Worth really just embrace the university? Like, you look across town at SMU, and I guess they could say they're in the Power 4 now, but they haven't had the same level of support or success, or what is it about TCU? I know a lot of that has to do with Gary Patterson, but it just seems like that obviously tremendous support, great atmosphere in the stadium, but they don't have that big state school alumni base to really pack it out. So why do you think the TCU is so special?
It wasn't always like that either. Like, that's what's really cool is I was there when there was no one in the stands. When they bribed us in the sororities to show up for a quarter, and like we had to stay or we got in trouble. And I was there when Fort Worth didn't embrace TCU. The lore is that Gary Patterson had a meeting with the then mayor at this breakfast shop that everybody in Fort Worth knows called Yogi's over on Hewlin Boulevard, and it basically said, we need to be Fort Worth University. And Fort Worth is going to be better if like we can be better together. We can help each other. And Fort Worth is a really unique, special little city. I don't love everything about Texas all of the time, but I do think Fort Worth is a really, really cool place to live, and it makes me really happy to have that as my address on my mail. But I think that the way that these two the city and the university, have been able to kind of parallelly grow together has been really, really unique. And downtown Fort Worth is a very different kind of downtown compared to a lot of other major cities. It is one of the faster growing cities in the country. TCU is one of the faster growing universities in the country. But at the end of the day, we still have just about 100,000 living alumni. UCF has 50,000 undergrads. So
right.
It is one of the smallest schools in the Power 4. I think it's in like the bottom 5. It's like Vanderbilt, Stanford, Northwestern, and TCU might be the 4 smallest universities in the Power 4. So it is a tougher battle to fight in a lot of ways. But the university really, like, everyone throws around the family feel and the 40 not 4 and all that kind of stuff, and it rings hollow a lot of places. But in my experience at TCU, that frog family thing is very, very real. And those athletes do love to come back, and they love to be a part of the university. Even when Gary Patterson left and Sonny Dykes came in, a lot of those alum have continued to come back and be a part. LaDainian Tomlinson, who is, arguably the greatest athlete in TCU history. You have to say arguably because Davey O'Brien and Sammy Baugh are both TCU former TCU football players. He not only is on the board, comes back to speak, but if anyone remembers the early 2000s, which not many of us do, he did a video when Nike dropped a shoe with the electric slide, and it was this cheesy, terrible commercial. It was so bad and so early 2000s. He recreated it, and they showed it at the video board at TCU's opener. And it is like, that doesn't happen a lot of places, where a Hall of Famer was willing to kind of tongue-in-cheek laugh at himself and let 50,000 people in the stands watch this masterpiece of an early 2000s video be recreated with a man who is now in his 40s. It really is cool. And because the university is so small, you have classes with the athletes. You get to know those guys. You see them around campus. They become just members of the community. And even though they are treated special like every great college athlete is, they do feel more like it's just a place they get to go to school and be regular people and then hopefully show out on Saturday nights.
Yeah, what is game day like on campus at TCU? Like, what are we going to see? What are UCF fans? We'll see what the traveling contingent looks like. I know UCF has a decent Dallas-Fort Worth alumni base. I know for fans in Florida, this is kind of the game that a lot of people circled to say they were going to attend easy flights to Dallas-Fort Worth. So what is it like? Is there a big tailgating scene that we have all day to get ready? It's a 7:30 Eastern kick.
That is a great question. And for those that don't know, the current athletic director at the University of Texas, which is probably the biggest college athletics program in the country, is Chris Del Conte. Well, Chris Del Conte spent his time before he arrived at Texas at TCU. And one of the things that he did in order to change the game day atmosphere and make TCU a big time program so that they could not only secure an invite into the Power Five, but be a legit program outside of just wins and losses, was hire the company that helps Disney do their customer experience work. So he brought out, apparently you can buy these guys. They come out and they help you design atmospheres around game day. And I've heard Chris Del Conte talk about this. It's absolutely fascinating. I don't have all the details offhand. But what they did was they basically shut down all traffic within campus. TCU is very much a college campus. It's a college town. It's very separated, but there were still a lot of roads throughout the campus. They shut all those down. They make it all walkable. They have Frog Alley, which is super family friendly. There's games, there's giveaways, there's activities, there's a lot going on. They often have live music. You'll see the Frog Walk, which is where the football players walk, is a big deal on campus. The atmosphere and the food inside the stadium is exceptional. They do a happy hour pregame where they open up at an hour or 2 hours early, and they do discounted food and drinks. The tailgating scene is I think for a school our size is really, really incredible. And it stretches to the very outskirts of campus. I mean, there are people that are parking a 20-minute walk from the stadium that are tailgating. There's great setups. Everybody is very, very friendly. That's one thing I've noticed. And I've actually seen this throughout the entirety of the Big 12. You go walk around the parking lots, someone's going to offer you a beer. Somebody's going to offer you something to eat. They're going to welcome you in. They're going to give you crap because you're wearing the wrong colors, but they're still going to want you to join them and be a part of the experience. It's also super bougie because it is TCU. It is a private school and there is a ridiculous amount of money. And so you're going to see some really, really exceptional setups as well. So it's not like West Virginia. If you have not gone to West Virginia to tailgate,
UCF goes later this season.
And I hope it's not too late because the weather, I've been there for a snow game, but was not pleasant. But that to me is the ultimate Big 12 tailgating experience. They are the absolute best before the game. Be careful after the game.
Yeah.
But TCU, I think, really, really holds its own. It's a great atmosphere, great experience. The game day atmosphere, I think the in-stadium entertainment is really, really exceptional. I think they do a great job of keeping people active and engaged. And because it's a night game, because it's a blackout game, I have a feeling that you're going to get, as long as it stays close early on, the very best of TCU fans. I think that people are going to be super hyped up for this. And we're small, but the stadium should be loud. It should be electric. That you'll see a lot of the pyro and the different things that make the stadium atmosphere cool. We will not launch a rocket over our stadium. You will not see something go to space. We are not as cool as Space U in that regard. But for being a little school in Fort Worth, I think that you will have a really, really great time if you show up Saturday. And get there early. Parking sucks, but get there early. Find a tailgate to hang out with. Meet some friends. You'll have a great time.
Yeah. Speaking of parking, are you an expert? I know some of our fans were wanting me to ask you, do you know the parking situation? Are there any secrets? Any tips?
So the best thing I would suggest is get there a little bit early. TCU is a religious school, so there are multiple churches. It's not really a religious school, but it's associated with a religion. I'll put it that way. There are multiple churches on around the campus. I think UCC, which is on the corner of University and Canty, I have to like see it in my head. I think they do like $30 or $40 game day parking. Honestly, it's my best tip because you're helping out the youth group at UCC, which is a great thing to do. It's easy in and out. Get there a little bit early because it will fill up. But if you're there 2-3 hours before, you should be able to do that $40 cash parking. I think that for all things considered, it's a pretty good bargain. I park in the garage because that's where media parking is. I would never encourage anybody to park in the garage if you're going to leave right after the game because you'll be in there forever. But there's also tons of parking all around. Street parking is not great, but you can go to the grass lots by the tennis center. If you can pre-buy parking over by the baseball and soccer stadiums, it's not super expensive. I think you have to pre-purchase it, and it's a little bit of a walk, but that's where a great tailgating scene. That's where all the RVs and everything are, so that's great. But you can definitely find parking if you get there a couple hours ahead of time, and that UCC is probably my best bet for cash parking.
So you talked about you've been to West Virginia. I take it you've been to a lot of these Big 12 locations. I mean, obviously all the new schools and the PAC schools coming in this year. I'm sure you haven't been to those places. But how would you rank? How does TCU's atmosphere kind of? I know everyone's a little bit biased. I'm sure you're obviously a little bit biased for TCU. How does TCU rank with the K-States and the Texas Techs and the Oklahoma States in terms of atmosphere for a stadium?
So, I have not been to Kansas State, shockingly. It is high on my bucket list. I won't get there this year because we don't play. But I've been to Kansas. Now, I was at Kansas before Kansas was good, so I don't really count that. I've been to Texas Tech.
Kansas atmosphere was not that great. Yeah, terrible.
Texas Tech is fine, but again, I've been in years where they haven't been good, so I don't like to fairly judge it. I was really disappointed at the game day atmosphere because I really thought the fans would be more engaged because what else is there to do in Lubbock? But it was not a great scene. Texas felt very corporate. Oklahoma, and these two schools are not in the Big 12 anymore, but right. Oklahoma was elite. Oklahoma State, if you haven't been yet, I highly recommend Stillwater. It is very quintessential college town. The people are super nice. The tailgating scene is really good. The stadium is really interesting. The sidelines are tiny. It is a really hard place to be a photographer. And the year that I went up there to shoot, I had been hit on the sideline by a player. I took a helmet to a knee, and so I could barely walk. And I was terrified being on that sideline that I was going to get hit again. It was such a stupid decision. But I find that to be a really great atmosphere. Baylor sucks, but I mean, just because I can't say anything nice about them. The water is cool until you remember it's like a poop water and it's not that great. Their stadium looks like a toilet bowl, which is perfect. They're fine. It's fine. I think TCU really, again, for its size, really, really holds its own. I am super, super biased as a longtime season ticket holder and tailgater, even before I was a media member. But you're not going to walk around and be like, oh my God, this is like an SEC school. We're tiny, but you will have a good time. That I can promise you. It's not going to be overwhelming like West Virginia, but you will have a great time. You will be fed. Texas barbecue, I will not be taking questions on this, is the best in the world. I have traveled all over. I have lived multiple places. Do not give me Memphis. Do not give me Kansas City. I don't even want to hear about South Carolina. Those are all fine in their own sense. Texas barbecue is the best, and you cannot walk 100 feet without running into a smoker.
Okay, so just give me some suggestions for this weekend, because we have a lot of UCF fans are going to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Are there some places around Fort Worth? What would you recommend? Do you have one or two?
Oh, no, I have 30, but I'll try to keep it short. So number one Texas barbecue place in the country last year was Goldie's Barbecue. It's a little bit of a hike, and they're not open all of the time, but it is worth it. It is out in the middle of nowhere. I can't even tell you where it is, but Goldees, that was rated number one last year, which means it is the best barbecue in the world. No questions asked. There's a great little outdoor place on the water. It's supposed to be a little bit warm this weekend, but not too bad. It's called Woodshed. That's about a 5-minute drive from TCU. Hurtado Barbecue TCU, if you're going to swing by and look at Globe Live or AT&T, Hurtado Barbecue in Arlington is kind of Tex-Mex fusion, elite. Probably my favorite barbecue place that there is in town right now. It's exceptional. Magnolia, which is near Southside, great bars. The Usual on Magnolia Ave is probably my favorite old fashioned. And then there's a great little speakeasy downtown called Thompson's if you want a place to go after the game if it's not too late. Across the street from TCU, if you want something within walking distance, Dutch's Burgers is a great burger place. There's a Fuzzy's Tacos if you want to get some Tex-Mex. You can go to the Poop Deck. The Aardvark, I think, is reopened again. You don't have to go far to get a great meal at TCU. There's walking distance. There's driving distance. Anybody that has any food questions, please hit me up on Twitter. I won't call it X. It is Twitter at @VCoachMelissa. I will be happy to answer your food questions and any other information. Get me talking about Texas food and I will not shut up, obviously.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about this game and this matchup between UCF and TCU. I think everyone knows what TCU did 2 years ago. That was what Sonny Dykes' first season at TCU after, he moved across. Did he actually move across town? Did he have to sell his house? Okay.
Yeah.
So
you don't live in Dallas and coach at TCU. That is not allowed.
Okay.
That'd be a big no-no.
So he did move across town to Fort Worth, and that was a magical season, making it to the playoff and beating Michigan in the first game, but kind of I think Gus Malzahn called it a buzzsaw when you got to Georgia.
Yeah, no, we don't know what happened after Michigan.
Yeah.
I just remember that. Yeah.
So last season, obviously it's not going to be the same team year to year. Was that surprising, the 5-7? What were kind of the expectations? It's kind of hard to pencil in, we're going to make a repeat to the playoff, but how did fans view last season?
A disaster. I don't think that everybody thought there might be a fall off. You don't lose, I think, 8 guys to the NFL. You don't lose Max Duggan, who was the heart and soul of this team, and just pick up right where you left off. But if you remember, Chandler Morris was the starting quarterback going into 2022. And then he got hurt, and Max Wally pipped him and never gave up the job. Chandler Morris was back for 2023. And when you talk about elite practice quarterbacks, when we were talking, you talked about KJ Jefferson as being a bad practice quarterback and a gamer. Chandler was the exact opposite at TCU. You've never seen a dude practice better than Chandler Morris. He was absolutely exceptional. But when the lights came on Saturdays, he just couldn't stay healthy, which is not his fault, but just really didn't have the same kind of mojo and juice. And so I think TCU fans saw a world where they could get to 10 wins and make it back to the Big 12 championship game, but probably were more expecting to be in that 7 or 8 range. To go 5-7 was unacceptable. And everything we saw around the program, everything we've heard in the months since is like the vibes were terrible. The vibes were bad in the locker room. This team did not have enough leadership. Guys that had been leaders the year before just really did not kind of step up into increased roles when the big voices like the Quentin Johnstons and the Steve Avalas and the Max Duggans left. And nobody really took ownership for the maturity of that team. And Sonny Dykes talked about it. The season just never ended. They were playing into late January, which really extended and hurt their recruiting efforts. They tried to patch holes in the portal, and they were not successful because they tried to get guys from big programs that hadn't panned out and hoped that things would magically change when they came to a different big program. That didn't happen. But they were so late in the game, they had a really hard time getting the targets that they wanted. And then, Sonny also talked about the fact that in the transfer era and the portal era, you can't really expect players to mature and lead themselves because generally your older guys, if they're not on the field, they're leaving. The minute the season is over. And so they just never got the chemistry. And they were you've kind of heard players talk around it, but the impression I've gotten from what they've not said, but have clearly tried to say, it was a pretty selfish group. And they just had not bought in. And so what we've heard a lot this year is that this is a much more unified group. There are guys that hang out with each other off the field, not just during football. That was not the case a year ago. There's definitely a maturity that wasn't there previously. We've seen guys like Johnny Hodges, who was hurt most of last year, step into a vocal leadership role. Guys like J.P. Richardson, who was his first year at TCU last year, has gotten a lot louder. Those two were going at it in practice all throughout fall camp, but in a way that was encouraging and competitive, not angry. And now you also have your quarterback established day one. it's often said the locker room picks the quarterback, and the guys got behind Josh Hoover when Chandler Morris went down in a way that you just hadn't seen when Morris was the starting quarterback. And I think that their trust and faith and belief in Josh was at a higher level than it was in Chandler for whatever those reasons were. And he missed all of spring with an injury, but he was there day one of fall. And you can tell that these guys truly love him, truly love playing for him, and that the knob gets turned up, the dial gets turned up a little bit in intensity when he's the guy that's taking snaps. And so this team is odd.
Yeah. Tell me more about Josh Hoover, because he redshirted that playoff season in 22. He comes in mid-season last year?
Yeah.
With after the injury. I mean, did he establish himself right off as maybe, people realizing he's the quarterback of the future? Did you go into the off season expecting him to hold on to the job? Did they bring in transfers to compete with him? Just kind of talk about Josh Hoover and how he's kind of entrenched himself as a starting quarterback.
It's really interesting because when Lincoln Riley left for Clemson and Kendall Briles was hired, they made some ovations at some big name quarterbacks in the portal. They tried to get, I can't remember his name, but the kid from that was at LSU that transferred out. They went after Austin Novosad, who was a Baylor commit, who ended up at Oregon. They definitely tried to bring in another guy when they knew that Chandler was on his way out. And they tried to bring in another guy even going into the season with Chandler. But the thing with Sonny is that I think he's almost loyal to a fault, especially when it comes to quarterbacks. And it's certainly when it came to Chandler Morris, because Chad Morris and Sonny Dykes had worked together for a long time. Chad's a longtime high school football coach and is coach at the collegiate level. And so I think that there was a loyalty to Chandler and a desire to not do wrong by a kid who had, left Oklahoma to come to TCU and stuck around through the coaching change and who everybody thought had a chance to be really talented and is tearing it up at UNT. And every TCU fan could not be happier for him. It just wasn't a good fit here. And that's fine. That's what the portal is for, right? Even if you use it like 3 times like Chandler did. But Josh was always the afterthought. He was an Indiana commit. When Sonny got the job, one of the first calls he made was to Josh Hoover to get him to transfer over to TCU. He's a local kid. He's from about 40 minutes away. He was a really good high school player, but really, really under-recruited because of just the competition in DFW at the quarterback position. And he's a guy Sonny's always believed in. And he obviously redshirted, like you mentioned. He wasn't going to beat Chandler a year ago, but he came in the middle of the Iowa State game and he did some things that gave people some hope. And he looked really good against BYU. I think he threw the ball 54 times in his first ever start. So it was obvious that Kendall and Sonny really trusted him and just kind of let him rip it. He made a lot of rookie mistakes. He looked really confused at times. I think things would have been great if he had gone through spring. But they never, they kind of kicked the tires on KJ Jefferson. We talked about that in my podcast. That was who a lot of fans wanted to see, but they never really made a move to bring in a portal quarterback that would legitimately compete with Josh Hoover this year. Now they went and got Ken Seals, who's a local kid who had started a lot of games at Vanderbilt. He was never brought in as competition. He's there as a QB2 and a guy who always wanted to play for TCU and didn't get an offer out of high school. And then they recruited a 4-star from a local powerhouse program at Lido, Haas Haney, who was an early enrollee who actually played a couple snaps in the Stanford game at a critical moment and then hurt himself and will be out for a couple weeks. So it was Josh's job basically from the time spring ball kicked off, even though he wasn't out there. And he went into the fall as the clearly defined QB1. Through 2 games, he's done the things we expect him to do. He's really accurate in the short to middle game. He mostly takes care of the football. He's got a little bit of gunslinger to him, but they haven't asked him to take a ton of chances downfield. He's super, super accurate for the most part, but he's not the kind of, I don't expect him to, how quarterbacks can go on a heater. Hoover isn't one of those guys that you're going to see go on one of those unbelievable heaters and just start ripping it all over the field. But I also don't know that he'll be asked to do that. He's going to be as good as this offensive line is, because if he's given the time, he's a very intellectual quarterback. He's a better athlete than he gets credit for. And he can make all the throws, to be cliche, but he's not the kind of guy that's going to be, he's not a Max Duggan. And he's not the kind of guy that's going to put up video game numbers, but he could be really efficient, really good. And when he needs to throw it down the field, like we saw him hit a beautiful seam pass against LIU, but he certainly can make those big explosive plays when called upon. That's not what Kendall Briles has asked him to do so far this season.
So looking at the offensive side, who are some of the weapons that he has? Who are some of the players to watch, whether it's the running game, receivers? Who else should we be on the lookout for?
You are going to hear the name Savion Williams so many times Saturday night. He has led the team in receptions each of the first two games. They have not been able to find him down the field, but he's probably the best receiver on paper for TCU. He's got all of the measurables. He's huge. He's fast. He threw a ball against LIU. He was a high school quarterback. He's recorded one of the fastest times that TC Metrics have ever recorded. He's been clocked over 22 miles an hour, and the dude's like 6'4". I mean, he's massive. And so he is like like a bigger Quentin Johnston, but not quite. He probably doesn't have the ups and the ability to win jump balls as good as QJ did, but he can win contested catches a lot better because he's so physically strong. You're also going to Jack Besh is another guy who he was I think a freshman All-American. He led LSU in receiving as a true freshman, moved to tight end, transferred to TCU, got hurt, was supposed to be inside receiver, got moved to outside receiver because of other injuries, had 140 yards against Stanford and looked incredible. Great route runner, great body control, just really consistent receiver. We all thought JP Richardson was going to be the security blanket for TCU. He plays in the slot. He's been really good. He didn't have a big game against LIU, but he didn't need to. But he's another guy that I think Josh Hoover's super comfortable with. We didn't see the tight ends do hardly anything against LIU, but they were really important against Stanford. Drake Dabney's a Baylor transfer who they have really high expectations. Jared Wiley was a really good player for TCU the last couple of years, got drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs at tight end. Drake Dabney is like a little bit more athletic Jared Wiley, so he has a chance to have a great season. And then the running backs, as great as UCF's running backs are, TCU's came in with a lot of question marks and a lot of inexperience. But so far, Cam Cook, who is a true sophomore, has looked really good. He's got 4 touchdowns in his first 2 games. He's a grinder. He's not going to break off the 40-yard run in the first half, but he will wear you down consistently. And in the second halves of both of those 2 games, he's been really, really exceptional. And he's growing into the role. Behind him, Dominic Johnson, who is a Arkansas transfer who came over to finish his career with Kendall Briles. Trey Sanders, who at one time was the #1 recruit in the nation, signed with Alabama. Got in a car accident that was so bad they were afraid he'd lose his life, let alone never be able to play football again. He's finally healthy this year, but has not been as much of the game plan as I think we all kind of expected. But he's a guy that has shown a little bit more speed and burst. And then you have some young guys. Jeremy Payne kind of got a lot of reps late in the game against LIU. He's a true freshman, but he definitely looks like he could be special. So there's a lot of pieces to kind of mix and match. There's a lot of individual skill talent and star potential. But it's all going to come down to the offensive line, which is starting to kind of grow together as a unit. But Sonny is still using rotation, and that has me a little bit concerned going into this weekend.
So on defense, who are some of the names to watch? Some playmakers, who are guys that we're going to hear their name called on Saturday night?
So my favorite defensive player is very quickly becoming Cooper McDonald. He is big, he is fast, he is athletic, and he always manages to be somewhere where the ball is. He's had a couple of tip passes, a couple of sacks. He's a transfer from San Diego State that has really looked explosive playing in that kind of stud position that Andy Avalos ran at Oregon. He's been super, super just chaotic, and I really like that. I think the middle has been solidified with Caleb Fox and Timon Mitchell. Your 2 leading interception getters on this team are number 91 defensive tackle Timon Mitchell, who had one of the best interceptions I've ever seen opening night against Stanford. If you like big guy interceptions, go back and watch Timon Mitchell against Stanford. And then Nnamdi Obiezar, who's another one of my absolute favorite players. He's a linebacker. He had a great pick off a Jamel Johnson tip ball against LIU. This is the most quiet, unassuming guy you've ever talked to off the field, and on the field, he's going to rip your head off and not apologize for it. He's a tackling machine, and he's getting to drop back in coverage a little bit more. Jamel Johnson is a safety. He's been wearing the green dot for communication. He is a true sophomore, but he also just always seems to be around the ball. So I think that what you're going to see out of the stud position, kind of that hybrid linebacker, defensive end, pass rusher position, any guy that lines up in that spot, and there's about 4 of them that'll rotate through, those are the guys you can expect to kind of be trying to get in the backfield, give KJ Jefferson a hard time. And then, the cornerback position, if you're a UCF fan, that's what you really want to watch. There were a couple of really big injuries early on in camp that mess with the depth there. So you have a lot of transfers kind of start like playing a lot of snaps outside. if KJ has time, there will be opportunities to attack those guys. But I was so impressed with what Travis Broughton, who is a transfer from Utah, did against Alec Aomar, who was one of the best receivers in college football in week 1. So they've definitely performed at a higher level than I think anybody expected. But that's certainly an area that you'll want to watch. If the pass protection is there for UCF, I think there's opportunities to make big plays down the field. And thankfully, TCU has been able to put a lot of pressure on opposing offensive lines through the first 2 games of the season.
Penalties seem like they've been an issue the first couple games. Is that an area of concern, or I'm not sure where those penalties have been. I haven't watched the games, obviously, but what's going on with that?
In week 1 against Stanford, TCU, I think, had 6 15-yard penalties. I think 4 of them or 3 of them came on Stanford's first drive. Sonny Dykes kind of came out after and said he thought the officiating was a little bit soft. They cleaned it up a lot from week 1 to week 2, but there still were quite a few penalties. It's going to be interesting. TCU's defense was really bad in 2023, and Andy Avalos has brought kind of a lot more pressure and a lot more aggression, which can lead to more penalties. And so I think they're trying to learn how to balance being disciplined with being aggressive, and that's just taken some time. They had some devastating penalties against Stanford. The penalties against LIU weren't that big of a deal. I think, and I don't even want to say this out loud because I don't want to jinx it, but the corners have been good about being physical without drawing flags. I'm knocking on wood if you can hear it, that hopefully that continues. But now my dogs think that there's someone at the door and they're going to start barking because they're idiots. But we love them. But, it's the personal fouls, it's stuff after the play. It's the maturity penalties that they need to cut back on. They've definitely improved from week 1 to week 2, but with the emotional, just kind of intensity around this game, that's going to be something to keep an eye on for sure, and could certainly get TCU in trouble. The pre-snap penalties, again, knocking on wood, but not actually this time, because I don't want my dogs to lose their mind. They have been very minimalized. There have not been a lot of, formation penalties, different things like that. So I think the things they can control, they've been doing a pretty good job of. Just on the defensive side, I don't want to say dial it back a little bit, just be a little bit smarter when it comes to the personal fouls and the after the whistle type things.
Yeah, Vegas sees this game being very close. What was TCU, like a 2.5 point favorite or some
1.5?
1.5. Okay, 1.5 point favorite. So basically, and TCU has the home field too. So, how do you see this game playing out? Obviously, to both schools, both fan bases, I think everyone's hoping to get off to a good start in conference play. I know it's a big rebound year for TCU, trying to get last year's taste out of their mouth. For UCF, they want to establish themselves to be a Big 12 contender. TCU, obviously the same. What needs to happen if TCU is going to be successful against UCF, and how might you see this game play out, in your opinion?
I mean, this is such a terrifyingly fascinating game for me. TCU started a little bit slow on offense each of the last 2 games. And so I could see kind of a situation where the first quarter is very much a feeling each other out kind of thing. I could also see where this thing just starts going up and down the field right away. Like, the Big 12 is not the Big 12 of old where every game is, 45-42. We're not going to have any Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes type shootouts, I don't think, anymore. But I certainly could see this ending up being one of those games of like whoever has the ball last is going to win. And I say that even having been so impressed with how much better the TCU defense has been this year. And like you were saying on my podcast, how the UCF defense has certainly improved. I could very quickly see this devolving into a we're just going to chuck the ball around and have a good time kind of game, which I would be totally fine with. Like, I think that would be a blast. I don't want to say it's going to come down to turnovers, because I feel like that's so cliche, but I do think it's going to come down to momentum. And that's even probably more of a cop-out answer than turnovers. A team falling behind by 2 scores here might not necessarily be, a nail in the coffin. But if it changes the momentum, if TCU loses the crowd, I think that it won't take much for UCF to get off and running and to get out in front. I think they're playing with a ton of confidence. KJ Jefferson is such a heat check kind of quarterback to me that if they let him get hot early or they let him break off a couple of big runs, that could spell absolute doom for TCU. And that's my biggest fear. Like, RJ Harvey's going to get his, Penny Boone is probably going to get his. Like, they might have, 250 yards rushing, but as long as like 85 of those yards don't come from KJ Jefferson and broken plays, like I feel like TCU can stay in this game. I am fascinated to see what the TCU defense can do against this running attack of UCF, because I think it is one of the absolute best in the country. So Josh Hoover We know we can toss it around 50 times, but I need to see this TCU run game get going early. Like that to me is going to be the key to success is can you slow down UCF in the run game? Can TCU's run game be effective? Because if you can keep them off the field when they want to pound the ball down your throats, then hopefully it gives you a chance to keep that defense fresh and rested and effective. So I'm scared. Like, I'll just say, I think I believe in TCU. I definitely think they can come out and win this game, especially at home. I'm glad it's early in the season. If this was a November game, I'd feel a lot differently probably. But I really think that this is going to I'm hoping it's a one-score game going into the fourth quarter, and then I'll really like TCU's chances. But I'm afraid if UCF gets a big lead, they'll just be able to grind that clock down behind that running game. And so staying within one score and not giving up the momentum early is critical for TCU's chances to win.
Well, Melissa, I've had a blast talking to you over these last, 40 minutes. It's flown by. I was only expecting 20, but you were so great.
He says that, and then I just keep talking. So
it's fantastic. I love it. But it's been so much fun talking to you and learning more about TCU and learning about your background. And I'm glad that you've been part of this journey with the Horned Frogs through the years. So
it's been great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, and hopefully I'll come and find you on Saturday afternoon in Fort Worth. And I know our fans will appreciate the suggestions and advice on places to eat and park and everything. And thank you for your time, Melissa.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on, Brandon. And I hope there's a great contingent at UCF fans out there Saturday night because I just think TCU Stadium is a great place to watch a football game. So hopefully we'll all be very entertained.
All right. Take care. Thank you.